What an honor to be invited here and to watch the work of this amazing organization. So first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for making it possible for me to be here today. I grew up in the Jewish tradition. I grew up learning about tikkun olam, the literal meaning of which is fixing the world. We are expected to leave the world a better place. And I confess that looking around and opening the news, it's very easy to fall into despair. And as you saw, despair is everywhere around us. When I find myself on the verge of falling into despair, I remind myself of this little story. They say the rabbi needed a new pair of pants, and he ordered them from the village tailor. Well, the days went by and the days went by, and the pants weren't arriving. The rabbi was getting very worried. He's never going to have the pants in time for the holy Passover. Finally, at the very last minute, the tailor arrived with a pair of pants. The rabbi looked at him and he said, "Thank you so much, but could you please explain to me, how is it possible that it took God only 6 days to create such a complex and wonderful world, and it took you more than 6 weeks to make one pair of pants?" The tailor looked at the rabbi. He said, Rabbi, how can you compare? Take a look at the mess that God made. And then, take a look at this fine pair of pants. Well, I'm not here to fix the mess that God made. But I'd like to share a little bit of my experience of using storytelling for peace building. I'd like to offer you some excerpts from my show, A Land Twice Promised. The show itself is about 75 minutes long, so I won't do the whole thing here. There is a DVD for sale afterwards if you're interested. And I have my notes here just because I'm not used to jump from part to part, so please forgive me for that. But I really believe in what Jean Knudsen Hoffman, a Quaker peace activist, said, "An enemy who's a person whose story we have not heard. Peace is a healing process that acknowledging both sides are wounded." So storytelling for me is not just my profession and not just my art form, but it's kind of the way of life that I believe in and what I believe can be a very powerful tool for peace building. And so I want to share with you a little bit about this storytelling piece that I created. I met a Palestinian woman when I came to this country in 1990 to Davis, California. My husband was doing a PhD, and I met this woman. She was from Jerusalem too. We became friends, and through this friendship, we had an experience that was so powerful for me that I created this piece. And I'm going to do some excerpts and then talk a little bit about the process of creating it and some of my experience in performing it in this country and abroad. So this is how it begins. Jumana and I met on the green grass of America. It was a family potluck. She was holding her baby boy, I was holding mine. She had the kind of dark beauty that I recognized immediately from home, something about her eyes that reminded me of a shy gazelle. So I walked up to her. "What's his name?" "Tamara." "And yours?" "Itai." "Where are you from?" "Jerusalem." "Near Ramallah, actually." "Oh, I'm from Jerusalem too." Her American husband stepped right in. "My wife is a Palestinian, you know." As if I didn't know. But I didn't know if she'd want to talk to me. And she didn't know if I'd want to talk to her. I grew up in Jerusalem, a divided city where the buildings are made of chiseled stones, white, cream, many shades of gray. When I was a little girl before 1967, there were always places at the edge of the city you couldn't go to. It was the border. Once my mother took me to such a place. There were rusty orange signs. Caution, mines. No man's land. No passing beyond this point. And she took my hand, and we climbed on a heap of stones and stopped in front of a large roll of barbed wire. And through it I could see a field, a vast field, with slabs of concrete and iron beams sticking out like crooked fingers, and beyond them, filling the entire horizon, was a wall. It almost looked like the fortresses from the fairy tales, with rounded roofs and minarets peeking behind it. And my mother pointed. You see the wall over there, Noali? That's the old city. The wall surrounds the city all around. No cars can go through. The streets are so narrow, you can jump from roof to roof. Inside, are you listening? Inside, it's divided in 4 quarters. There is the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. That's where the Wailing Wall is. The last remaining wall of the temple that Solomon built. King Solomon from the Bible. Jews lived there for thousands of years, and now they won't even let us pray at our own Wailing Wall anymore. We won the war, we have our independent state, but the old city we had to surrender. So many gave their lives. When you're older, I'll tell you the stories. My mother. She's always sighing and talking about the dead heroes, and I didn't like it there. I was scared. They could be watching us from behind those walls. They could shoot us. When my grandmother hears the word Arab, she says, Yimach Shmam, may their name be erased. They took my Yaakov. Yimach Shmam. Yaakov was her son. He's gone. Where I come from, we say he fell. Where I come from. The news is on the radio every hour, 24 hours a day. And on the buses, the drivers turn the volume up and all conversations stop. There's always something. Bombs in the marketplace, buses blowing up, wars, 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 but there's no choice. That's what I grew up with. We don't want war, but there's no choice. There's no choice. They want to throw us into the sea. There's no choice. We have nowhere else to go. My father had to leave his home in Prague in 1939. My mother's family fled from Nazi Germany in 1936. And everyone else in their family is gone. On the Sabbath, my grandmother lights the candles, and she covers her eyes and she mutters names. Every Sabbath, the same long list. Her father and mother, brothers and sisters, their husbands and wives and the children. So many children. All gone. The Nazis took them. Yimach Shmam. The Nazis, they can come at night and take you away. The Arabs, they shoot you. When I was a little girl, I had this dream. All through my childhood, I had the same dream. It had 2 different endings, but it always started the same. I bake a cake with pink and white frosting, 3 tiers high. I sneak out at night when no one is watching. I climb the wall. I know exactly where it is. I slide down the tree on the other side of the wall, and under the tree on the other side of the wall, there's a table, and all the Arabs of the world are sitting around that table, and I come disguised as one of them, and I offer them the cake. When I was very young, 3, 4, 5, I dreamed that I bring a poisonous cake. They eat it. I only pretend to. They die, and I save my country. I bring peace to Israel. But when I was a little older, 6, 7, 8, I realized maybe it won't be so simple. So I dreamed that I bring a real cake. They eat it. They like it. And then I reveal myself. I say, look, it's me. I'm a Jew and Israeli. We're good people. Please stop shooting.
You frighten all the children. I'll tell you what. Why don't we make peace, and I can bring you many cakes? And they instantly agree. And I save my country. I bring peace to Israel.
Well, as far as my mother is concerned, I'm an extremist. Since 1979, I went to university and started going to demonstrations against the occupation of the Palestinians. Oh, Nolly, Nolly. You are so naive. You're not realistic. The trouble with you and your entire generation is that you were born after. You don't know the history. You talk about their suffering. What about our suffering? How we were attacked from all sides in 1948. I was there. I know. We were attacked from all sides, and then again in 56 and 67 and 73, attacked again and again. We are still being attacked. We are fighting for our survival. Do you think for 1 minute, if they had won in 1967, we would be alive today? Not a chance. They don't want peace. They want Akko and Haifa and Jaffa and Jerusalem, and that we will disappear. Jumana and I met on the green grass of America. Davis, California. Davis, for those of you who don't know, is a town where the biggest political struggle in its entire history has been to save the toads from being squashed when they cross the highway. I'm not making this up. They built a tunnel to save the toads in Davis. Tamara and Itai were friends in kindergarten. They spent hours being superheroes, conquering the world, combating Pokemon. And we watched them. We watched them grow on that green grass. We watched them grow without the fear. And no one put it in words, but each of us knew. Back home, my son would grow up to go to the army and check IDs at roadblocks. Her son would grow up to arrive at the checkpoint and throw stones at the oppressor. Slowly, cautiously, over the years, Jumana and I started to talk. So this is how it begins. And it goes on, and I'll do a few more excerpts in a minute. So in 2000, I went to a conference. I presented at a storytelling conference, and I took a workshop about the importance of telling difficult stories. And it really changed my view, and I realized, I need to start telling stories about where I come from. And I started working on my memories from the 1967 war when I was in 3rd grade. And I realized I know this woman now for 7 years. Our children are growing up together. We grew up in the same city, not 5 miles apart. And I never heard what that war was like for her. As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever heard what that war was like for a Palestinian. And so I called her up, and a new chapter in our relationship began. She always said that if we hadn't had that trust built between us, she would never have told me these stories. But the fact is that she started by telling me I don't have a story, I'm not a typical case. She's a Christian, my life is sheltered, my life has always been sheltered. But I'm an Israeli, you don't take no for an answer. So I came over and we started to talk, and I started asking questions. And the stories came out. And for the first time in my life, I was hearing what it was actually like to live under occupation. I thought I knew everything. I was active politically in Israel, and I had Israeli-Palestinian colleagues at the university. But I never had a friend who was a Palestinian. And something extraordinary happened when we started to talk. Often she would say something that was the truth with a capital T. That was history the way she knows it. Those are the facts. And I would look at her and say, that's not the facts at all. That's not the truth at all. That's Arab propaganda. And then I would say what was history and the truth with a capital T. What was the facts, what we learned in school, what I know from my mother. And she would look at me and she'd say, but that's not how it was. That's Zionist propaganda. And we would come to places where we would argue because, you know, I had my truth, she had her truth. And then she'd look at me and say, look at us. Look at us, we're becoming defensive again. And we'd start laughing. I'd pick up the baby, she'd go make a soft-boiled egg, and we'd continue to talk. And never, never, never was there a moment where we felt like we can't continue to talk. And that experience, that ability to hold the compassion, the ability to hear each other's truth even when it contradicted everything that you believed in, because we had opened ourselves up to hear our stories, that experience was so powerful for me that I decided I have to do something with it. And so I started recording our conversations, and I started crafting the stories. And the results is A Land Twice Promised, which is this piece that I'm giving you a little bit of excerpts from. So let me do a little part of Jumana's story. Are you still with me? Oh, let me just give you a little overview of the structure of the piece. So there's 4 parts to it. There is Jumana's memories from being arrested when she went to Birzeit. And when she went to Birzeit University in about 1974, and then there is in 1981, and then there's another story which I'll do right now, which her memories of being in 5th grade in 1974. Then there is my memories from the 1967 war when I was in 3rd grade, and then there is her mother's memories of that same war. So it's kind of like perspective of her mother. And then there is my mother's story of 1948 and what she experienced a little bit in the old city in Jerusalem. So that's the basic structure of the piece. All right. I'll tell you a funny story. You know, I come from a good family. My father came from a small village north of Ramallah. When we were young, we used to go there to visit my grandfather. And there was this little hill there at the edge of the village. My father would take me by the hand to the top of the hill. And from there, you could see all the coastal cities. The lights, they shone so bright, you could almost touch them. And my father, he would point, he would say, Jumana, you see those lights down there? That's Ramle. You still have many, many cousins there. And to the south over there, that's Jaffo. That's where our family is from. That's where your grandfather was born. But his brothers, they had to leave their home there in 1948. So that's my family. My grandmother, she only talked about the Turkish occupation, the hunger, the taxes. My parents, they grew up under British occupation. They were married under Jordanian occupation. I grew up under Israeli occupation. But my parents never allowed us to be involved in anything. No violence, no demonstrations, nothing. My father just wanted us to have a good education, and my mother just wanted us to be alive. And I was always a good girl. I always stayed out of trouble. My dream was to be an engineer. Though I knew there were many people who finished engineering school with very high degrees. They couldn't get any work. They ended up being construction workers, building homes for Jewish settlers. But I was determined to be an engineer, and I started Birzeit University when I was 17. I'm just going to fast forward to another part of Jumana's story. I was always afraid. Even when I went to school, I was afraid. You know, I went to the girls' Catholic school, the girls' school inside the Christian quarter in the old city. Every day, I would go with my little sister, my friend Nadia and her little sisters. We would get off the bus outside the gate Bab al-Amud. The tourists call it Damascus Gate. And from there, we would go, we would walk through the souk to the school, the market. You remember the souk? I love the souk. The dresses, how they hang above the shops like colorful curtains and the little polished donkeys and camels made of polished olive wood. I always wanted one of those. But they were for the tourists, you know, the tall blonde men and the skinny, skinny ladies. I never understood how they could show so much skin, you know, the way the men in the market looked at them. I would be so embarrassed. But I loved looking at the tourists. And I loved the mountains of sticky sweets, the halkum, the baklava. If I wasn't such a good girl, I would probably be in the souk all day just looking at them. But I was never even late to school. And one day they were banging on the school gate. Ta'alu! Tajaru! It was the boys from the public school. They were starting something to commemorate the beginning of the occupation, the 67 war. This is long before the first intifada. They would sneak 2, 3 at a time and see where a soldier is standing, throw a stone and run away, and almost like a daring game, see who can get the closest without being caught. But at our school, the nuns, they didn't allow any of that. They knew the soldiers would get upset, and then they start throwing tear gas and shooting, and they put a blockade, and you can get stranded inside the walls of the old city and never be able to go home. And so the headmistress said, "School is over now, girls. Go home. Be quick." I grabbed my little sister. Nadia took her sisters. When these things happen, we go to Nadia's father. He has a shop not far from the school. He can take us the safest way to the bus because you never know where the boys will be or the soldiers will appear. And so we ran really fast. And we came there, and Nadia started banging on the door. "Baba! Baba!" But it was locked. There was nobody there. And from the other side of the alley wall, we heard, "Hunak!" Over here. "Dir balak!" Be careful. "Allahu Akbar!" God is great. And we heard the sound of stone pinging on metal. And my little sister, she started to pull my skirt. "I want to go home. I want to go home to Mama now." And Nadia looked at me, and I looked at Nadia. It was up to us now. We were the oldest. We were in 5th grade. So I grabbed my little sister. I figured we have to get away from that wall, that's for sure. And I started to lead the way. We have to somehow get to the souk from there. It's crowded with all the people, and it's not far to the bus. And so we ran so fast. And we ran, and we ran, and we ran. And we ran down the steps, around the curve, and we came to the bottom of the alley, and it was the souk. But it was quiet like a grave. All the shutters were closed. No dresses. No tourists. And I remember they say, there's this quiet right before they start shooting. And my little sister, she was crying and crying and pulling my skirt. "I want to go home. I want to go home to Mama." And Nadia looked at me. We're gonna die. They're gonna shoot us. We're gonna die. We have to hide. We have to hide. They're gonna shoot us. And I knew we have to hide, but I didn't know where to go. My legs were like stones. And then a man came from one of the alleys. He said, "This way, children." And he banged on one of the shutters, and it opened up like Ali Baba's cave. It banged shut behind us. It was one of the tourist shops we passed every day. And all the little camels and donkeys were piled up in a little table in the middle. And the man said, "Sit here, children, don't be afraid." And outside we could hear the bullets pinging on the stones. And my sister was crying and crying and crying, but I decided I was not going to cry because I'm the oldest. I'm in 5th grade. It goes on. Tamara and Itai were running around on the green grass playing Combating Pokemon! Pikachu! I choose you! Pew, 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 pew. And they were hiding under the slides. And Jumana looked at me across the picnic table. "And you? How is it for you growing up in Jerusalem?" And I didn't know what to say. How can I tell her that those soldiers who terrified and haunted her entire childhood were our boys, our symbol of security? Everyone that I knew that turned 18 and went to the army, including my brother. How can I explain to her that the soldiers that scared me were the ones that came in the nightmares, the Nazis with the black boots? How can I tell her that what was the beginning of the occupation nightmare for her? I remember as the first time in my life that I saw my mother cry with tears of joy. We lived in the same city. not 5 miles apart. And our lives were so different. Would it be all right to tell her? But when I saw her smile, I knew that Jumana and I could talk about anything. So I said, I'll tell you about my first war. We lived in a 3-story building, 2 entrances, 12 families. It was the last days of 3rd grade, June 1967. The radio was on with instructions all the time. An army camp appeared overnight in the pine grove at the edge of the street, and my mother was standing on a chair pasting brown strips of tape on the window so the glass won't shatter when the bombs fall. There was going to be bombs. There was going to be a war. When we came home from school, all the adults were home from work. They were filling sacks with sand, piling them up against the entrances. Everyone was working together for the war effort. Ami Lapidot said that all us kids could be part of the war effort too if we helped clean the furnace room. He said, if there was going to be a war, we're going to have to sleep in the furnace room, all the neighbors together. Well, Ami knew everything. He was in 6th grade. My best friend Galia's big brother had a mop of chestnut hair in complete possession of my heart. I always followed him. We all did. And we followed him with brooms now, down the 5 steps to the furnace room. Me, Galia, Nuki and Margalit from the other entrance, and my little 6-year-old brother always dragged along. And there was the furnace room. Single light bulb dangling from the ceiling, broken furniture on the dirt floor, one tiny window with no glass, just bars on it like a prison window. And beneath it, something we've never seen. It was a faucet without a sink. Well, you know Jerusalem in June, don't you? Hot. In no time at all, we dragged out the furniture. Ami jumped up, opened up that faucet. Ice cold water splashed in all directions. We were soaking wet, splashing in the mud. The war effort is cool. The war effort is cool. For some reason, none of the adults appreciated our war effort that day. We were sent upstairs and forbidden to play. Next day, I woke up with a high fever. My parents had to go to work. They left me with grouchy-faced Mrs. Levine from downstairs, who told me to be a good girl and read my book, and I did. But then the air was pierced with a long, wailing siren, and she came running in. Quick, quick, to the shelter, put your slippers on. Is this the war? Where's my mommy and daddy? I'm not going down there without my mommy and daddy. Your parents went to get your brother and sister from school. Now you don't give me trouble. You put your slippers on. The furnace room looked so different. The light bulb was painted dark blue. And there was a blanket covering the window. All the adults that were not at work or at war were huddled around a transistor radio. All the kids were still in school. They told me to be a good girl. And then the siren stopped wailing, and there came a sound I couldn't name. It was like a long, wailing whistle. And then an explosion like 1,000 thunders, but then there was another one and another one and another one. The walls were shaking, the ceiling was shaking, it was going to fall on my head, and I wanted to scream, where's my mommy? Why isn't she taking me from this place? But no sound came out. And then it stopped. Another siren wailed. My father came with my brother, and all the kids came from school, but my mother, my baby sister. My father wasn't answering my questions. His eyes were fixed on the door, and then I don't know how he heard anything in all that noise. He ran and he opened it, and there was my mother with my 3-year-old sister in her arm, and she thrust a bag into his hand. I got flour. You ran under the bombs. Are you out of your mind? Oh, don't ask. The teachers in the nursery school were in such panic. I couldn't leave them like that. I had to keep all the children under the table until the parents came. And then I started to run, and I remember we don't have enough flour. So I went, I got 2 kilo flour, and I came. You never know, it could be like in 48. What do we need flour for? My mother looked into my eyes.
Noali, Noali, always remember this. If you have a little bit of flour and a little bit of water and a little bit of oil, you will never be hungry. My mother always said strange things. So, I want to give you another little excerpt from Muna's story. We were sitting in Jumana's kitchen. She said, we lived in Shafat at the time of that war. You know Shafat? Yes. I remember we drove by after the war. I remember the stone houses on the hillside with the laundry drying on the flat roofs and the terraces filled with fruit trees all covered with dust. Oh yes, dust. That's my neighborhood. None of the roads were paved when I grew up. I grew up with a lot of dust. But you know, I don't remember anything from that war. Perhaps we should talk to my mother. Her mother Muna came to America to help with a new baby. She embraced me. Of course I remember you. You made homemade tahina to Jumana when Daniel was born. I said to Jumana, she is lucky to have a friend like you so far from home. I always tell Jumana, there are Jews that are good. But you want to hear about the war? It was a very difficult time for our family. My husband doesn't like to talk about it. But you are Jumana's friend. I will tell you. At the time, we lived in just 2 rooms that we rented upstairs from Mustafa. She was the widow that owned the building. We were just a young couple in the beginning of our way. It was June, early in the morning, but already very hot. I was up on the roof, hanging the laundry. And I could see far below, at the bottom of the hill, the bus just left with Khalil, my husband. He worked not far from the walls of the old city. And before he got on the bus, he smiled. He said to me, don't worry, there will not be a war. I looked around. Everything looked so peaceful, so normal. Maybe he is right. Maybe there will not be a war. I could not imagine a war. I was never in a war. But I remember the refugees from 48. I was a little girl holding my father's hand, watching them in our orchard in Birzeit. So many of them. They came day after day, and they were under every tree, in every house, and they had nothing. Later, the UN, they brought them tents. But I was a little girl holding my father's hand. Now in 67, I was a young mother with 3 little ones of my own. Jumana was 3. Wael was 2. He was still in diapers. Sami was 6 months old. How could I imagine being in a war? But when I went downstairs, somebody was running up the street yelling, they said on the radio, the war has started! The war has started! And at that moment, I had only one thought. Flour. And a lantern if the light goes out. I left the children sleeping with the door open. I ran up the street to Haj Mahmoud. I said, 2 kilo flour, and there were gunshots. I fell to the ground. Ya Rab, dear God, just get me back to my children. I must get back to my children. Haj Mahmoud, he lifted me up. He said, don't be afraid. It's just Wahad Majnoon, one crazy one from here. Look. A young man was running up the street, shooting in the air. Yalla ya Jamal, let's go fight, let's go free Palestine. But I did not care who it was. I could not stand there for 1 more second to wait for him to pour the flour and weigh. I had to get back to my babies. I was so terrified I would be separated from them. You know, I grew up with all the stories from 48. Like that woman in Haifa, how she left her baby and went to see if her husband is coming back, and the crowds, they were running away from the Jews, they swept her away. She could not return to her baby.
I did not care if this was fiction or fact. I could not leave my children. I swore I will not leave them until Khalil returns. But there was no bus that day. Khalil did not return. And from the mosque, they called on the loudspeaker, "Stay away from the windows. If you live on the second floor, go to the first floor." So I took the diapers, the blankets, I took the tin of flour. I had a little bit left. I prayed it will be enough for the children. I can go without. And I took the children down to Mustafa. She had a corridor with no windows, and all the women and the children at the end of our street came there. And the men and the older boys, they went to Abu Salim. He also had a corridor like that. It was crowded in there. Alani came with her 2 children. Her oldest was 2. Salim, Abu Salim's wife, with her 5 daughters. 2 of them were married. 1 of them was pregnant. I was there with my 3 little ones. And Mustafa, she was a big woman. She took us to the kitchen. She opened up all the cupboards and she said, "Fadalu ya jiran. Help yourselves, my neighbors. You can take anything you find in this kitchen, but dir balkom. Don't touch the coffee. Without coffee, no one can live with me." I wanted to go upstairs to bring her my coffee, and at that moment the light went out, and there was a whistle, and then explosion like thunder, but then there was another one, and another one, and another one. The walls were shaking, and the ceiling, and everything. Everybody started to scream. Mustafa, she was yelling, "Ya Dilla, rakhbatna, rakhbatna." The house is falling, and everybody started to scream and to pray. My neighbor, they prayed to Allah. I prayed to Ya Adra, the Virgin Mary. I didn't know what to do. I lay on top of my children. I put my body on top of all 3 of them, and I closed my eyes, and I said, "Ya Adra, Ya Rab, dear God, just make it so that we all die together, so that no one is left to suffer alone." All night long, I lay like this on top of my children. And I swear that's all I wanted. Just to die together with them. I did not believe I will see another day. And it goes on. I think for me, when I was starting to listen and listen with that kind of open-heartedness to my friend's stories, what amazed me is these images that came out from her story that echoed what was in my life. Her father showing her, the land beyond, my mother showing me the land beyond before 67, and the story about the flower, because I never understood what my mother was talking about when I was a little kid, and it was just under that title of my mother's craziness. And then I meet this woman, and she tells me her family's pivotal story. And every family has like this central story that they tell and they retell. And their central story was how, at the last day of the war, the 67 war, her mother was left with just a tiny little bit of flour, and she mixed it with a little bit of water and a little bit of oil to bake bread for the kids and to make them happy. She put it in a cake mold because she couldn't give them a cake. And she tells me this, and all of a sudden I understand what my mother talked about. That if you have flour and oil and water, you'll never be hungry. She was talking about making bread, and I never understood that. So these parallel images, or Mustafa crying and saying, this is in the later part of the story, the old city fell. And my friend is translating from Arabic because her mother didn't feel comfortable with her English, so she told the story in Arabic and wrote it, and then my friend was translating it. And I said, no, we say the old city fell. And she said, yeah, but we say it too. I said, no, you're not translating this right. We can't be using the same word, but we are. We do. The relationship to Jerusalem is so emotional, and you could just hear it in the language, in the way people relate to it. So the city fell, just like when somebody dies, we say he fell. And so it was really powerful for me to start hearing these images, these parallel images. And for me, it symbolized these two parallel narratives. And so for me, these personal stories echo kind of like the national narratives of our people that, you know, echo each other and don't meet sometimes. I want to just give you a glimpse of the last story, because as I was starting to work on this and as we were continuing our conversations, very, very intense 2 months that we talked every single day, I realized that the pivotal event for us was 67, that everything changed for us, but that we experience history and our view of history comes from our personal experience, and the personal experience, the formatting personal experience of our parents goes beyond 67. And so I wanted to include, you know, their glimpses of the 48 story through her mother's story, and then there's their experience of 48 in my mother's story. So I'll just give you a little bit of that story. My mother was 19 years old. Her brother was her god, and he was a very bright young man who left the religious studies in Tel Aviv and went to the Jerusalem University to study law and history, and was active in Lehi, the fighters for the freedom of Israel, who were fighting the British for a Jewish state. And the British found posters in his room, and they arrested him. And she was trying to talk to a lawyer. She was sent from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem at 19 to talk to a lawyer to get a permit to visit her brother, because they weren't getting permits to visit him in jail. And so this is where I'm going to start there with a little bit of an excerpt. But that's the story, you see. My mother sent me on a bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to talk with a lawyer to try and get a permit for my brother to visit him in jail. And the day after I came, it was November 29, 1947. The declaration of the UN for the partition of the land. Oh, I'll never forget that day. People were dancing in the street all night long. All night long. Strangers were kissing me. We were going to have a Jewish state next to an Arab state. Everyone was ecstatic. But the next day, the shooting started. The Arabs did not agree. And the one road leading to Jerusalem, anyone trying to go in and out, they were shooting from the hills. So Jerusalem became under siege. No food, no medicine, no water. And I couldn't go home to Tel Aviv. But I was young, and so, you know, I volunteered to help here and there, and I spent the time like everybody else, hungry. You know, we spent hours and hours standing in line with little coupons just to get a little bit of flour, a little bit of water, a little bit of oil. But inside the walls of the old city, it was so much worse. The Jews in the Jewish quarter were being attacked from all sides, and the British did not allow any reinforcement to try and protect them. Until finally in April, they declared, teachers and nurses will be allowed to go into the old city. I was young. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be like my brother. I knew if Yaakov would only know, he would be so proud of me, and all I wanted was for Yaakov to be proud of me. And so I volunteered to be a teacher, and I entered the walls of the old city. But the minute I came there, it was clear they did not need teachers. There were so many wounded. People were being blown up in their own homes. They needed nurses. So they gave me a white coat, and they gave me white tennis shoes. And that was it. 19 years old, with a white coat and tennis shoes, I was a nurse. I didn't know what to do. But the commander left me at the entrance of the hospital. He ran off, and I just stood there. And there was a smell. I thought I was going to faint. And everywhere there were people on blankets, on the floor, everywhere. And I didn't know what to do, and I closed my eyes, and I thought, what will Yaakov say? What will Yaakov say? And I could just see his smile. And I could hear his voice. He would say, ציפילה, יהיה בסדר. It will be all right. You can do this. So I took a deep breath and I walked in. And there was a man in the corner. His shirt was soaked with blood. And so I took a little bit of water and I knelt by his side and I put my hand under his head and I smiled. יהיה בסדר. It will be all right. And I gave him a little bit of water. And it just dribbled down the side of his mouth. So I was getting ready to give him a little bit more. And then the nurse saw me and she said, "What are you doing? What's the matter with you? Can't you see he's dead?" How could I know? You know, I was a girl from a religious family. I never saw a dead body before. But I learned. You know, I learned to do things that my mother would never have believed me. I thought Yaakov would never believe me. After some time, I became very strong. The blood didn't scare me. The smell didn't bother me anymore. I just did everything they asked me. I tore the sheets to make bandages. I gave aspirin. That's all we had. Sometimes the doctors let me hold the lamp when they were doing surgery. But to be honest with you, I never thought I'd come out of there alive. Every day, the Arab mob would stand above the walls of the Jewish quarter and yell, "Itbach el Yahud, Itbach el Yahud, kill the Jews." And they were throwing grenades and shooting. Our boys had to cut holes in the houses because it was not safe to go into the street, to try and evacuate the citizens, to put them in the synagogues, to try and protect them. And maybe we would have survived. But then, on May 14th, Israel declared independence. And the next day, the Jordanian army invaded and they had cannons. And that was the beginning of the end. We had no more food, we had no medicine. I was giving water with a spoon. They said we had ammunition left for 1 hour. And it goes on. And it goes on to tell the story of how she came back home and discovered that her brother was killed. I want to just do a little excerpt from the end of the show. Okay. Sorry? Okay. So I could just leave it at there and open it up to some questions. Is that okay? Two questions. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I thought I had until 3. Sorry. So, if you want to see the whole thing, it's over there, or you can talk to me. This show has been traveling now for almost 10 years. I've done it a lot on campuses. I've done it with a lot of interfaith communities. And one of the things that I've been doing with this show is I've taken the process that I went through of creating it, and I've created workshops where I invite people, I walk people through a model of sharing their own stories as a way to open people up to listening to each other and to dialogue and to peace building. And I've been doing that with youth. I've been doing it with churches and mosques and Jewish congregations, and I really see, you have people that for the first time get to actually hear what it's like to be the other, and I feel that we need to do a lot of that in order to get to know each other and in order to build any type of future together. And I don't think this is the answer, but I think it's one of the things that we need to do on the grassroots level, and all the little streams, every little stitch in a fine pair of pants is important. So if there's any question, I'd be happy to try and answer it. I have 1 minute left. Yes?
What is the response of the Jewish people hearing you tell the story?
I've been getting all responses, all possible responses. I have people who come and are very moved, and I have people who come and tell me I'm a traitor, and this is anti-Israeli. I have people who come and tell me, you know, Palestinian people who are very moved, and Palestinians who tell me this is, you know, you're only talking about the suffering of the Jews because somebody died in your family and nobody died in her family, and Palestinians are being killed every day. So I get it from all sides, but I think what I came to understand is, you know, I'm not here to tell the suffering of the Jews or the suffering of the Palestinians. I'm here to tell my story, and I want to stay true to our experience. You know, this is who I am, this is my family, this is the woman I met on the playground, this is our experience, and these are the choices that we made. And we chose to be open, we chose to stay with our compassion, we chose to listen to each other, and I chose to give voice to these stories. And so it's a choice that we have to make every day. You know, we all have our traumas, and we have a choice. Do we let the trauma harden us, or do we let it break our heart open, and do we keep it open? And that's a choice we have to make every day. And so that's what I try to do. So thank you so much.